Hi, folks. It's me, and it's Thursday, and so normally we have class at 5:30. And this morning I let you know that I was going to record something and cancel that class, and I may have jumped the gun because the weather seems to improve quite a bit. But I know there's a lot of flooding around, and there are some more heavy rains going to be cycling in later in the system. So. That's okay. We're just trying to be careful. And this should work out okay. We're going to have to do this later in the semester anyway because of the way that we have the semester set up. So you should know that I look different without the mask, and I don't have to wear the mask here because this is my office at home. And what I'm doing is I am talking to my computer. Um, which is on PowerPoint, and it's recording this. And what I do is I put each slide together individually one at a time, and then I can kind of transfer the whole thing to a video. And I put it up on YouTube, and then I put the link on Canvas. It's a kind of a complicated process, but you should know that you'll be just looking for a link on Canvas that you'll click, and if you can open any place that you can open YouTube, you should be able to watch this lecture, including on your phone. So that should work out fine. I don't have a lot of tools here except clicking from one slide to another, but I do have kind of a highlighter thing where I can circle stuff while I'm talking about it and maybe draw some arrows and say, look, this is important stuff. And so I might be able to draw your attention to certain things as we go along here. Anyway, this is it. Here we go. And I'm going to be talking about chapter 2, which is about discovery. Already started it, but I'll kind of start and move through the beginning stuff quickly. Okay? All right. All right, so I know I put this slide up before and talked about this in class, but I just want to review it. What we're talking about here is discovery and what that looks like in an elementary school classroom. And it looks a little different maybe than the way that we're used to thinking about kids learning in general and maybe kids learning science in particular. It says here that it's grounded in constructivist theory, and I asked you guys about what you knew about that, and I don't know whether that just wasn't fresh in your minds or whatnot, but I kind of expected a little bit more theoretical educational background. The basic idea here is that it's not about knowledge, it's about mentality. It's about the way that kids think, not about what they think. Although clearly being accurate here is important, and so we need to bring that into play. So we're trying to get them to make sense of the world, but also to see themselves as capable of science. And a lot of that has to do with self-confidence and excitement. And so those are not actually things that you can train into a student. You just have to kind of make it possible and hope that under the right conditions, they will have experiences that will produce these types of dynamics in them. And sometimes that's the best that we can do. So it says here, making sense of the world based on accurate scientific concepts and principles. That's clearly the knowledge part of it. Doing science rather than learning about science secondhand. That's the inquiry part of it. And down below it says that students are going to be making personal discoveries with our guidance. Really, you have to be able to give them the freedom to make really ugly mistakes sometimes. And that's the hardest thing for me. I want to ask a question, and if they don't know the answer, I want to give it to them. That's the way I think. That's the way I think with you guys, and maybe I'm not even doing that right with you. But I know that that's the way a lot of teachers think with the kids. And so this is one of the reasons why a lot of this is very foreign, because the idea is to give them the opportunity with guidance, the opportunity to try something and to be prepared to make big mistakes. And that has to be all right. That has to be encouraged in many ways. Encourage making mistakes. Yes, that has to be part of it. That's part of this process of discovery. And then I mentioned that the last line here is the kind of it's the kind of disclaimer line at the end of a lot of things from this text and from this area, saying, well, we also have to consider that all kids think differently, act differently, and we need to meet them halfway, and that's what this is about. We're going to have a whole kind of chapter about that, but this is just reminding us that there's no one mechanism that's going to allow us to do this for all of them. Okay, now here we're back with our friend Archimedes, who was this ancient Greek fellow who discovered the principle of buoyancy and the displacement of water, and then got so excited that he ran around the town half naked screaming Eureka, and it's that kind of excitement that we're after here. That is the essence of the excitement that comes with discovery, which is what one of our major goals is. In fact, it says here that the ultimate goal of science is discovery because it comes with prestige, honor, pride, and recognition, which is why many young people become scientists, because they recognize the social currency that comes with that. And in fact, the subtitle here under the National Science Foundation is that the science is where discoveries begin. So that's what we're after, is to try to grab onto that excitement and make sure that all the kids understand that that's possible. And this is, of course, how we try to sell the science curriculum, and this is how the publishing houses and the teaching materials people try to sell the materials that we're getting for science. And this is the kind of wow moment that the kids love, and we feel good about passing on to them. But beyond the excitement, something else has to happen that helps them to understand what's going on here. So this is part of it, but then we come to the inquiry part of it, and I'm trying to show how these things fit together. And the good news for us is that this doesn't just happen in the classroom, it happens all across culture, and so we can always draw attention to the kind of excitement that science gets. And this is a good example here. I mentioned this before. This is the last round of Miss America, who actually won the pageant, and her talent, I guess there's a talent part of the competition, was actually a science demonstration, which is pretty exciting and something that helps us out, especially when we're looking to maybe build up some excitement across the traditional gender relationships that kids have with science. So this is great. Okay, so here's a slide from the publisher. You can tell from that title, but I've made some changes to it. And I like things in threes, so it's nice that there are 3 items here. This is the first place where we're saying, okay, so how do I do this? How do I make discovery possible? I think probably the most important thing in this particular slide are the verbs that are being used. You see provide, you see help, and you see guide, and none of these are saying that you're testing or you are determining understanding. These are things that we do to encourage the process of discovery. There is no way to actually assess whether discovery is happening except through the excitement of the kids, which is part of what we're looking at. But that's not going to be something that you're going to find on the standardized exams. So maybe we're getting away from that. Maybe that's a good thing. So providing experiences, I'm just summarizing, helping uncover new information, and guiding maybe afterwards, kind of trying to bring together that discovery so that the students are able to have a better consciousness of what's going on. And I'm taking this and making it into a couple of other slides that make it clear. But the essence here is that we have things that are exciting to the kids and new to them, and are being integrated into their mentality about science, which is why it's part of that constructivist approach to learning. So I'll probably come back to this kind of thing. It's really, it's a little bit abstract, but it's just important to remember that what their knowledge is maybe not always the most important thing in terms of whether or not this science is being done correctly. So if we're after this discovery, then we're trying to get science time in class to be a time of enthusiasm, excitement, and energy. And so the choices you make about how that material is delivered have a huge influence on whether or not we're meeting these types of standards. It says here that the discovery process, whoops, I don't have my highlighter. The discovery process has a rhythm of learning involving high activity, individual reflection, peer discussion, and explanation. And I have kind of a model to explain that rhythm, but I think rhythm is important because when there's a rhythm to the curriculum, the kids know what part of the lesson that they're in. This is the new thing, and we're going to make it exciting. We're going to get the hook in them. They know that this is the thing that is going to be carrying them through the rest of it. I mean, they maybe don't know it like an analysis, but they know it in terms of their intuition, their subconsciousness. So you need to choose those activities very carefully. I think especially the ones that are used when we first introduce a new concept into a lesson or into a unit. So look for those hooks, look for those really exciting demonstrations or quick experiments that can be done in order to build up that excitement there. Okay, so now the chapter takes a little bit of a turn on us. It goes from the excitement of curiosity, getting started in science, to back into the inquiry, which we've learned is more the careful measurement and systematic approach to drawing conclusions from evidence, and they both have to be part of this process. The initial excitement followed by the careful examination of evidence and the sharing of information. And so I put down here at the bottom, careful and systematic. Systematic means one step at a time. And these have to both be part of that rhythm in order for us to be coming at this scientific curriculum from the next generation science standards type of perspective. And this is just to remind you that this isn't just about what's happening in an elementary school classroom. I've been doing this for years. Remember, I told you about my own personal scientific method that I use in my lab classes, going from understanding to curiosity to speculation to measurement and then finally sharing. And so what I've done is I've put the excitement followed by the careful and systematic approach to science. And I think that even this sharing is something that's a little bit different when we get to the end. And I think that relates well to this discovery approach. Anyway, this is happening everywhere. And so this isn't just about little kids. Okay, so I told you that I like things in threes, and so I'm trying to take all the things I've been talking about and put it into the three easiest steps that I can for you here. And I decided to be a little alliterative with this. EX, EX, EX. So we need to excite first, and then we need to explore, and then we need to explain. And those, I think, are the essence of the discovery-based science that we need to keep bringing into the classroom. So get the hook, develop the curiosity, and a couple of words that I've placed in here for that are demonstrate or challenge. When you challenge the kids to do something, that can be very motivational also. Then we get to explore, and this is the inquiry-based part of it. So we're going to search, we're going to discuss to try to figure out what the real questions are that we want to answer. We're going to measure things, we're going to model things, we're going to experiment with them. This is the things that scientists do. And then finally, when we start to draw some conclusions, we're going to share that information. We're going to give presentations. We're going to make arguments. Maybe you don't want to use the word argue with kids because an argument among kids might seem like something we're trying to avoid. But in the world of science, an argument is just simply making your case with the best evidence that you possibly can, which is really an important part of this. So with these X's in mind, I've created a model, a metaphor, if you will, that helps me to think about these three steps and maybe helps me visualize how I'm going to be feeding this science to my class. So we're going to start on top with the top bun of what I call the discovery burger. The top bun is very appealing. It's good looking. It's got the seeds. It is the biggest part that we need to draw attention in with. We call that the curiosity step, the excitement step. We demonstrate or challenge. Then below that, we have the meat of the science. We have the guts of this scientific process, which is the inquiry aspect of it. It is the searching, the discussing, the measuring, the modeling, the experimenting, the things that have been going on in science classes for a while. And then finally, after that's done, and even if we don't come up with any conclusion, we can talk about the process that we went through. And so that's the communication part, or the explanation, which is a little bit different from the discussing that we have up here. This discussing in the explore or the inquiry is about trying to share information to make the inquiry more effective. The final communication, the final explanation, is about sharing results. Anyway, I'm going to maybe make this into a patented teaching tool. No, not really. I just kind of made it up. I call it the Discovery Burger, and maybe we can kind of use that to remind ourselves about these 3 steps. Okay, so after I was done coming up with the Discovery Burger, and I went to see the next slide in this group, I was a little bit disappointed because I'm like, oh, it's going back to the next generation science standards, science and engineering practices, which we know, and we know that there's 8 of them, and here they are listed. And I thought, oh, I guess I can do that. It just seems like I was really kind of building on my 3s and my burger. But then I was looking at this and I realized that the science and engineering practices they represent the structure of the Discovery Burger. And so I've done a little bit of highlighting here so you can see it. The first step is asking questions. So science questions, and also looking for problems, getting the hook, getting the excitement, getting the curiosity. And then we're going to go down through the inquiry part of this, the meat of the burger, developing models, carrying out investigations, analyzing and interpreting data, doing some math. We're going to come up with solutions. And then the last step is going to be the bottom bun, which is arguing from our evidence. And we're going to be collecting other information and reporting what we're doing here. So even though this is next generation science standards material here, I can see the Discovery Burger in it. Maybe they're going to want to know about the Discovery Burger. So we'll have to see whether that goes across. Anyway, the next 8 slides are actually looking at these one at a time. Maybe this will help. Maybe this will help do that for you as we go through these. Okay, so the first SEP is asking questions and defining problems. This is the top of the bun, the top of the Discovery Burger, and I was so excited to see the word wonderment in here, which is exactly what I've been talking about. How does it work? What kind of information do we need? How can we solve this problem? That's a challenge. And this is what I've been talking about. So this is that first step. And if we're just scratching our heads while we're excited, then we're doing that SEP. So the next SEP is developing and using models, and that might seem like it might be like, plastic representation or something, but it can be any kind of representation of something. It can be, we're going to draw pictures, we're going to look at maps, we are going to make metaphors that explain how something is functioning. We do that naturally. We just need to do it naturally and consciously so that we know what it is that we're doing, and it needs to be something that supports our understanding. So modeling is very important in this process. Okay, the next SEP, this is number 3, is planning and carrying out investigations. This is maybe doing a test or an experiment that actually allows us to see if our ideas hold up under some type of scrutiny. And they're actually dividing this up into the type of activity you might plan in a K-2 classroom and the type of activity you might plan in a 3 through 5 classroom. The difference is that the 3 through 5 is going to involve making some measurements and collecting some numbers, some data, and maybe making a graph. Whereas in the earlier classes, we're going to say, well, how would we find out if that idea that you have is true? How would we find out if that stands up? And maybe that's just discussion, or we're doing mental experiments. And I think that kids are pretty good at that. We're just playing what if games. Those types of things I think come with time. Planning experiments for kids, some of it depends on knowing the kids and knowing how they approach these types of questions. So it's difficult to say this is the way we would do that, but know that at some point we have to develop activities that challenge the questions or the understandings that we have. And that's what an investigation is. Okay, SEP number 4, analyzing and interpreting data. I think actually you guys have a pretty good grip on this. I have seen in a lot of the teaching materials ideas about how to put a graph on the wall and add data to it, how to track things over time, maybe how to stack things up. And we talked about Legos and things like that that might be useful in that. Tables, graphs, diagrams, and the creative idea is what we're talking about. I think you understand as we look at graphs in a science class, there are ways to do that so that it's a meaningful representation for the kids. They need to be able to show a pattern, whether it's a pattern of increase or pattern of decrease. They need to be able to demonstrate this when they're communicating it to somebody else, which is what we're talking about when we say interpreting data. The next SEP is using mathematics and computational thinking. I think if I was going to lay these out, I would have put this one before the last one, because I think I want to count something or measure something before I go about making a graph. But that's okay. I didn't write the book. Counting. Oh my goodness. I mean, kids love to count. Try to get them to stop counting. My goodness, that's what they do all the time. But if they're a little bit more advanced, we want them to collect data, really simple things, temperature, speed, things that we don't need fancy equipment in order to gather information about. Create graphs, measuring. These are the kinds of things that we were talking about, going outside and looking at some things that you might find outside in the schoolyard. We might measure how fast a plant is growing. We might look at the moisture in the soils. Honestly, really simple equipment, thermometers and hydrometers, things that ought to be in anybody's classroom to be able to look at a few of these things. If you're going to be curious, then you need a drawer full of stuff that you can make measurements with, that you don't have to say, well, we can be curious about this thing, but not that thing. You got to follow your curiosity. So that's important here, remembering what you need in order to make those measurements. Math and computational thinking. Okay, so this is the last step in the inquiry, the last bit of the meat of the discovery burger. It is constructing explanations, that's science, and designing solutions, that is engineering. And this depends entirely on what happened previously, because this is the point at which the kids say, what does this mean? What does it mean to you? What does it mean to me? What does it make me think about what's happening here? And this is where sometimes the big mistakes happen. Let's not call them mistakes. Let's call them speculation. Let's call them ideas. And these are the kinds of ideas that we're not supposed to say that was a mistake. In fact, we talk about the kids developing their own conceptual framework, and it's not until later that the teachers are going to challenge and guide those explanations. But you see, it's right at the end of the inquiry. Okay, we don't want them to get to the communication phase and be saying, this is what my evidence made me think, and to have that be way off target. So there is a point here, not to say you made a mistake, but to say, let me give you maybe some additional information that might help this make more sense to you. This is the guiding that can happen, okay, before we get to that last step. And I like this. I like the fact that this is where the kids are allowed to completely speculate and build an understanding based on their evidence. And it needs to be okay that they say, you know, this evidence that we collected just makes me more confused. And that's still good science, to just say, this information doesn't seem like it's consistent. Like this says one thing and this says another thing, and I can't sort out which one is which. That's still good science. In fact, sometimes I wish that more professional scientists ought to be willing to think that way. So again, this is where you might come in and help with the guidance part of it. Last step in the inquiry. Okay, now we're at the bottom bun. We've looked at the exciting top part and we've worked our way through the meat, and now we're going to support the whole thing with communication. And it says here, engaging in argument from evidence. The evidence is what comes from the inquiry. Now we're going to communicate it. And to do that, we need to choose our language carefully, and we need to say, this is why I believe this. This can be in groups, it can be individually, it can involve using those metaphors or models. You might even invite people in because that's the way scientists work. They have conferences where scientists get together and people get together and they say, this is what we think all this evidence means. So it's all about the communication. I don't know if they're going to use a picture or if they're going to demonstrate something, but this is where the kids are, to some extent, doing a little bit of the teaching, maybe taking turns or something like that, engaging in argument from evidence. And then this is the final SEP, number 8, and I'm kind of presenting it as the last bit of the lower bun. Although as I'm looking at this, I'm thinking some of this might have happened back in the inquiry phase. But if you're going to include reading in the textbook and looking at websites during the inquiry phase, I think that is going to really direct the thinking part. I think that once kids have seen a lesson about something, they're not going to be as creative. They're not going to be as discovery oriented. So I like the idea of pushing this off until the end. Maybe before the last step. Maybe this should be the first step in the bottom burger bun, because I think once you've collected your evidence and figured out what you think it means, then you do a little bit of digging into textbooks, into websites, into trade books, and then maybe that'll help to kind of direct your thinking before it finally gets communicated. So I think, again, I would rearrange these a little bit right at the end, but it still, I think, is probably important as part of the lower bun of the discovery burger. Okay, so you'll notice that with this slide here, it's still kind of one of the publisher slides, but you see I've changed the color of the background. I went from kind of a greenish color to a little bit of orangish. My intention here was to show that there's a transition in the flow and the thinking of the chapter at this point. And it took me a while to figure out what was going on, and I think it's pretty important, and it kind of supports the way that I was thinking to begin with, because what the authors are doing here is they're saying that the meat of the discovery burger is so important to the whole process that we're going to go back and look at it again. And so they say, what are the skills that the students need in order to do this inquiry? If that's the inquiry part of the burger, what are the skills that they need? And you look at this and you see, well, that's what we were just talking about before. They need to be able to model. They need to be able to do an experiment. They need to be able to discuss with each other what they think the explanations are and come up with better ideas, and maybe even do a little digging around to fix that a little bit. Anyway, so the next 3 slides are actually about these inquiry skills, looking at these things one at a time. But to me, it's kind of review. It's like, let's go back and look at the meat and see what kinds of things that we want to be able to challenge our students to do. So the first of our 3 steps in revisiting the meat of the discovery burger has to do with models, and they've emphasized descriptive models here. There's nothing here that's new. We're going to observe. We're going to use numbers to count. We're going to ask questions. I like this one here. I didn't emphasize that one before. Classifying is great. Putting things into baskets or sorting them into categories is a big part of developing these models. Anyway, so there's really nothing new here, just kind of going back and trying to be creative about the different ways that we are creating these models to understand what's going on in that inquiry phase. Okay, so this is stage 2 of the revisit to the inquiry, to the meat, and it's a little bit more complicated. There's some words here that we really haven't discussed very much. Inferring and hypothesizing and predicting. In fact, these are so complicated that boy, this is a really short list. Getting to this type of thinking with kids could be a little bit challenging, although in some ways it's kind of natural. You folks did some of it on your own on Tuesday night. If you remember that I had you go outside and come back in with an ask. And one of the things that we did in our discussion was based on the ask and my saying, you know what, I don't really know the answer to that question, but how would we go to the next step? That's what inferring and hypothesizing and predicting is about. How would we go to the next step? Hannah came in and said, you know, I saw this bush that had like this dead spot in the middle of it, and I was wondering what was going on there. And so we speculated about what might have caused that. Is it because it's not getting any water? Is it because there's an injury? Is it because there's something wrong with the soil? There's some poison. Maybe somebody dumped something in the middle of that bush. And one of the things that we did was saying, well, if it's about water, then wouldn't you expect to see that happening at the center of some of the other bushes? If it was about some kind of pest that was chewing on it, or a disease on the bush, wouldn't you expect to see evidence of that in some of the other bushes in some of the other areas? And so you start with speculation, and then you say, if this is the case, then what else should we be able to observe? That's what hypothesizing and predicting is. And inferring is kind of saying, if this is true, then this must also be true. It's kind of a logic thing. And again, the kids might not use that type of language, but they think that way all the time. And sometimes they just need a little bit of guidance to that. That's actually a difficult part of science, and I even with college students, I sometimes, it's challenging for me to get students to think in that way, and maybe just showing the example of your thinking in that way is the best way to guide them to that type of behavior. So a really short list, but some really important thought process. This is not about how we measure something or exactly what kind of graph we're going to make. This is about the way that we think about our speculation when we look for explanations to what we see. And the last revisit to the inquiry meat of our Discovery Burger has to do with experiments. To some extent, this is similar to the last slide we were looking at. In fact, look, the word predicting is right here, and the word predicting was on that slide also. But this prediction is different from kind of a speculative prediction. This prediction is, if we actually do something to manipulate this system, what kind of impact should we expect? And going back to the dead spots on the bushes, the easiest experiment to do there is, if we thought this was, a result of the water, then we would just water the bushes, especially in the place where we think that they might be suffering from lack of water. And that would be a very simple experiment that we could do in order to determine whether that seemed like it was actually part of the problem. It was the first idea that many people in the room had. Water seemed to be a big issue that we might connect to it. And of course, kids learn in the class that water is one of the needs that plants have. So that's perfectly reasonable. And here's an experiment. We're going to put water on it. We're going to watch it for a few days to see if anything changes in that area. Now, I don't know whether that was a problem. I haven't been out to look at those bushes, but clearly that's an experiment that could be done. This is in a little bit more detail here, and maybe by the time we get to 4th or 5th grade, we might want to be identifying independent and dependent variables and making a controlled experiment. So the dependent variable is the thing that we expect to change. The independent variable is the thing that we're tweaking. So in the example I'm talking about, watering it, the amount of water, because we're going to add water, is the independent variable. And the apparent health of the plant, whether new leaves are showing up or something, is the dependent variable. Sometimes those are called the treatment variable is the independent variable. Treatment is independent, and the response variable is the dependent variable. Again, not the kind of language we're going to use in K1, 2, but maybe 3 or 4, maybe 4 or 5. I would expect to get that. A lot of kids hear about controlled experiments, and that's basically saying, we ought to have a bush over here that's got a dead spot that we just leave alone, and so that we have something to compare our results to. If we're watering this bush and not doing anything to that one, we want to be able to compare them. The one we're not doing anything to is our control. We're going to say that there's no treatment. Okay, so the independent variable stays the same. That's basic experimental design. Again, that's maybe a little advanced, and certainly in my in the labs in my college classes, sometimes we need to revisit those concepts. But they are part of thinking like a scientist, and the kids are going to run into that language every now and then on the websites, in the text, in the handouts that they get. And then I guess this last thing is just about designing the experimental controls, deciding what the independent variable is going to be and how we keep it, how we either change it or don't change it. How much water are we going to dump on these bushes? How often do we dump water on these bushes? Where do we put the water on these bushes? That's experimental design. So those are questions that can be answered. We're just using fancy language to describe that type of thought process here. I think you guys got this. You just, maybe these words make it a little bit more scary than it has to be. Anyway, this is my last slide for this. And so I'm going to just say a few words to you right at the end here. And I want to revisit my burger. And so that's where I'm going. Okay, so here we are. This is our Discovery Burger. And we start with the curiosity, the top bun, the pretty picture that we want to create, the hook, and then we get down into the careful and systematic process of inquiry, which is the meat of the burger. And then finally, once we have developed some evidence and decided what it actually means, then we're going to communicate that, because that's part of what goes on in science. This can be something that takes place over a long period of time, or it can be something that takes place in the course of one lesson. That's up to you. You know these kids, and you're the one who's in the best position to guide them through these 3 steps. But this is what discovery means to me when it comes to focusing on the classroom. Anyway, if this is to be believed, I've been yakking at you for about 36 and a half minutes. And that's a little bit short for a class, but that's okay. And do you know why? Because you have a unit plan that's coming up due, and I want you to use this time to work on your unit plan. And when we get back together, I want to spend a little bit of time looking at what you've got. In fact, if you've got something and you want me to take a look at it, you need to be in communication with me as soon as you can, because that's what's going to be best for you. So, did you hear me? I said, I want you to be working on your unit plan. Okay, we got that through. Also, by the way, on Tuesday, we are going to be doing chapter 8, which is the space science chapter, which is always a lot of fun. And so there'll be a homework up about that. Anyway, the weather hasn't gotten much worse, but I took a gamble, and my experiment looks like it didn't result in the pattern that I thought it might. So there we go, science. I hope you are all safe and have a great weekend, and look for that homework. Work on your unit plan. Okay, take care. Bye.